Well, thanks for staying with us on the program this morning. The economy, that's what we want to talk about now. Beyond the figures, beyond the statistics, beyond the data, is the reality. Prices of food and other commodities continue to rise as along with the exchange of the dollar to the naira. It still beats me how tomato prices rise simply because the dollar and the naira are not friends. But
cost of fertilizer.
I don't fertilizer that we create in Ojota.
Well, there's some foreign component. It's like we were talking about gas before you went on leave. I mean, we produce gas in Nigeria, but
please don't remind me. Don't remind me.
12.5 kg of gas is now 6,500 in some places. So it's higher in some.
It's very, very, very interesting times that we're finding ourselves in. When we look at 1980 to now, the dollar was a servant, so to speak, to the naira, and what we have now is completely different.
Okay, to your question, yes, the figures would appear to be disconnected from reality. But again, if you also look at it critically, they also tend to reflect a bit of what we find. Take the GDP figure, for example. The latest figure we have for GDP for second quarter of 2021 talks about 5.01%, year on year. And that's largely because of the fact that the previous year, about the same period the previous year, the GDP was negative, in a negative territory, by as high as 6.10%. So the base effects, played a lot of role in the GDP figure that we got for second quarter of 2021. If you also look at inflation rate is, we are told, is decelerating at now at 17%, about 17%. Okay, but that doesn't mean that the prices are coming down. It simply means that they are rather rising at a slower rate. That's the information that figure contains. But if you look at other indicators, you will also get an idea that those reflect reality. Like the poverty rate, for example. The poverty rate in Nigeria, very high. You look at the unemployment rate. The latest figure we have at 33%. Okay, again up from just a little above 20%. So you realize that the macro indicators are not, actually improving. Because even if you take the case of the GDP report also said that quarter on quarter, the economy actually fell, quarter on quarter. So GDP growth is expected to have a positive impact on, say, unemployment, for example. But in a situation where the GDP growth is rising, and unemployment rate is also rising. Of course, you notice, there is a disconnect, and that disconnect is arising from the fact that the GDP growth is not seen to be an inclusive one. Okay, an inclusive one in the sense that you're looking at what is even driving the growth in the first instance. If you look at the second quarter report, yes, the non-oil sector it drove growth. But what are the sectors that's actually driving growth? They may not really be the employment-generating sectors. If we, for example, are growing the oil sector.
My apologies, Prof.
The oil sector
my apologies, just a second. I think that really is the issue. The fact that the figures are there, but then they are not reflecting in creating employment, dropping, consumer prices, even the interest rates, with which, micro, small, and medium Nigerian businesses would do business, or even any business at that would do business. But let me take the opening comments of Johnson Chukwu, who is MD Cowrie Asset Management Limited. Good morning and thanks for joining us. So first of all, what would be your first shot at this conversation that we are having? On the one hand, the inflation rate seems to have slowed down, well, marginally, the prices of foods, but it would seem like money is still quickly escaping the pockets of Nigerians.
Thank you, Yaya, for having me. When people talk about the disconnect between the economic data that is being published and the reality on their pocket, you just mentioned the issue of inflation. And if you look at the inflation figure at 17.01%, what that means is that between August 2020 and August 2021, the average price of goods and services have increased by 17.1%. It means that any basket of goods and services you bought for 100 naira in August 2020, you are buying it 117 naira in August 2021. And for a person whose income has not increased, and how many people have had an increase in their income by 17%, they will feel they can no longer afford the same quantity of goods and services they afforded last year. And as at this time last year, they were really complaining of difficulties in even meeting up their needs. So, and that has further deteriorated. So when you tell them inflation rate is moderating, they wonder, what do you mean by that? But what the data is only saying that the rate at which prices have been growing is actually slowing down. The speed, or if you want to use the common mass language, the speed at which these prices are increasing has slowed down. Just like saying the vehicle was running 100 kilometers per hour and decelerated to 80 kilometers per hour. It's still running. It's still at a top speed, but it hasn't stopped at it's not stationary. But what people are looking for is a reversal of what you call deflation. And that is not going to happen in the near future. As long as you're seeing increasing rate of inflation, investors are going to, consumers are going to struggle with recognizing the fact that we are saying the inflation rate is decreasing.
While, consumers continue to struggle, investors continue to pour into the country. At least that's the information that we get from people, from the authorities, that investors are always, I've listened to Mr. Babatunde Fashola, for instance, say a number of times, there has to be something that we're having. Investors continue to pour into the country, and yet the consumer prices are, abysmal. Is there something that we're missing?
In the first place, I don't know where the minister took that figure from. The figures at my disposal available to me is contrary to that. If you look at capital importation in the second quarter of this year, total capital importation was about $874 million, down from $1.9 billion in the first quarter of this year. Total foreign direct investment in the second quarter of this year was about $77 million. And like I said, total investment that came into the country in form of foreign direct investment, portfolio investment, and other inflows, other investments, was total just about $870 million. First quarter this year was $1.9 billion. The second quarter was less than half of first quarter. So it doesn't prove that we are seeing an inflow of investors into the country.
The figures are not, I'm not talking about something that I got from him maybe yesterday or day before yesterday, perhaps. It just occurred to me that even while, the economy had been gradually going the downward path, so to speak, but over time, I have heard him and a number of other people say, look, what exactly is the issue here? Perhaps it is something that some of us are just missing, unless my memory is serving me wrong here. But let me take this back to Professor Uwaleke. So I don't know what you would say is our challenge here. One of the things that a number of people have pointed to is the fact that we are a consuming economy, not a producing one. And as a result of that, getting the economy to fly as we would want it to would be a challenge until we start producing. That's a conversation many people have raised over time. How quickly do you see that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how quickly do I see that happening? It might take a while because it's a function of many factors. It's a function of the environment we find ourselves, the business environment. Just as you had, we are not getting the level of investments that we ought to have, relative to peer countries. If you compare us with South Africa, for example, the level of investments, in Nigeria, is quite low. And that is rubbing off negatively on, a whole lot of things, including the external reserves, where you find crude oil sales still accounting for about 90%, of forex. So investments into this country, may not, come in at the level that we what would expect with the uncertainties that we find, in the economy, with the level of insecurity, that we have in the economy, with the state of infrastructure that we have in the economy. So these are things that shape investments into the country. So to put a timeline, I would say that will take quite some time, because until we fix these things, until we fix insecurity, until we fix infrastructure, the ease of doing business generally, including issues around, taxes. I think the quantum of investments into this country may not really be to the level that one would wish. Before now, the level of capital importation, had been on the relatively high side, but in recent times, that has dropped. Of course, not helped by the COVID, the crisis, and for that to return to pre-COVID status, we may need to do more, especially in relation to insecurity.
Mr. Chukwu, now you've left me quite confused. I mean, not that I understand all these things about the economy very well. You said prices are rising, but they're rising very, very slowly, right? But incomes are not rising at all. And if you look at the basket of prices that I have in front of me, they seem to be the staples. Bread is there, yam is there, oils are there. We can't cook without oils. We eat a lot of yam in Nigeria. We eat bread. We can't eat eggs. We can't eat meat because the prices are rising every day. And the poor, hapless Nigerian is left with a static income. What does he do?
Okay, let me start by saying that what I said is the prices are rising, but they are rising not very, very slowly. But the key thing is that because at 17%, that is not slow at all. In other countries, inflation rate is in the region of 2-3%. Mm-hmm. But back to what we are saying, the key challenge that we have in the economy is partly because the major consumption, what accounts for the largest consumption of average Nigerians, is where the pressure is coming from. Food inflation. Food inflation is about 20% in the month of August, was about 20%. What that means, just like I said it earlier, that over the past 12 months, the average price of food items have increased by 20%. Of course, that means that some have increased by 40%, and some may have increased by 5%. So issues like tomato, beans, yam may be the one that have suffered the greatest increase. And we know why this pressure is coming from the food inflation angle. Because if you take out food inflation, the other food items or non-food items, the increase was only about 13.4%. So if we can bring down the food inflation rate to the same level as other items, then our inflation rate will be about 14%. But the challenge we have with the food inflation is this. We are having a situation where farmers have been displaced from major farming zones of the country. They can't go to their farms. They now need to pay taxes to some ruffians or whatever you call that they can get to their farm. And they even have run the risk of even being kidnapped after paying the ransom. So a lot of people have abandoned their farms. I have two friends who have massive farms, one in Edo State, one in Ondo State. Both of them have abandoned their farms. And these are commercial farmers. They've abandoned their farms. So that will tell the multiplicity of the number of people who cannot no longer go to their farms to produce. Talking of the peasant farmers in the northeast, in the north west, in the north central that have abandoned their farms that live in IDP camps. Until we address the issue of insecurity, we are going to continue to deal with the issue of food inflation, because at 20% food inflation, an average household has been pushed further into poverty.
Well, my apologies, Mr. Beg your pardon, Professor. Sorry, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. The comment that I said earlier was actually ascribed to Mr. Rauf Aregbesola, and it was just as recent as yesterday. It says that between 2019, August 2019, and now, the federal government has granted work permits to over 12,000 expatriates, added that the opportunities available to investors in Nigeria are quite profitable, essentially saying that despite our challenges as a nation, the country remains a choice location for investors. Now, that is ongoing. So one of the things that one would want to ask, I mean, you have raised an issue that is quite germane, which is that of security. And so many people have raised that as well. A challenge that a number of people see, which is an opportunity, according to the president of the AFDB, is youths. We seem to be leaving them behind in the entire scheme of things. I mean, you referenced, I think it was either you or Professor Uwaleke that raised the other time, the importance of bringing youths into the scheme of things, especially because of their viability in the ICT sector, the use of the internet, the use of technology, the use of digital tools and all of that. And of course, we all know how big Forex is among the young people now. So in terms of bringing them into this sphere, into this scheme of things, to help push up the viability of the Nigerian economy, what have we been missing?
One of these we've been missing is in terms of providing infrastructure so that Nigerian youth can operate from wherever they are. They can key into.
My apologies. You heard the president, in fact, over time, has been talking about the reason why the federal government continues to borrow. It is essentially to jumpstart the infrastructure gap in the country. Isn't that enough?
Well, that's why he said we are trying to jumpstart the infrastructure gap or close the infrastructure gap, but we will not close it. And I can tell you, unfortunately, the infrastructure gap is further expanding. And I'll tell you why. If you go to most Western countries today, IT infrastructure, particularly broadband internet service, is now considered as a critical infrastructure the government has to provide. So if you go to a place like England, wherever you are, if you stand in front of a shop, you have free internet service you can connect to. If you go to a shopping mall, you connect at free internet service. You enter a cab, you connect to their free internet service. So in effect, a young person who only has a smartphone can use a smartphone to start a business. In other countries today, that gap, the fact that we don't have, beyond Lagos, maybe Abuja and Port Harcourt, the internet services in the country is very weak elsewhere. When I talk about the infrastructural gap and that is a major constraint to an inclusive, bringing the youth into an inclusive economy, take for instance the issue of agriculture. Agriculture is the largest employer of labor in the country. And most effective labor force are the young people. But the young people cannot stay in the rural areas because there are no roads, there are no lights, there are no water. So the young people keep trying to migrate to the urban areas. And when they migrate, a lot of them have no other skill other than farming, unless they have gone to school. And when they get to the urban areas, they are completely excluded from the economic activity because they don't have the skills to fit in. So they are left with only providing manual labor, right now, acting as labor hands in construction sites. Again, other thing when Nigeria is lacking is addressing the issue of education, quality of education. And our syllabus, most countries have migrated to what they call STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which is what equipping the young people in India to develop some of these applications we are keying into. We need to go and look at our educational system and tweak it to be in conformity with what is obtainable in the world today, so that our young people will come with the skills that even if we don't have environment for them here, they can go elsewhere and compete with the world. If we address the issue of infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and when I talk of physical infrastructure today, I'm now including broadband internet services. The governments elsewhere are providing that as a critical infrastructure because the world is riding on information and telecommunication technology. We have not even provided roads. That's what the government is trying to close. They want to close the basic infrastructure, transport infrastructure. That's what they're basically focusing on. Then we have to address the issue of the soft issues, quality of education, the content of education, for us to bring our children into the global economic space, not just the Nigerian space.
Now, Professor, Ayo mentioned earlier that we are a consumer nation, which means to a large extent that we require a lot of foreign exchange. How is this going to be made available? Or do you foresee us moving into a position where we do not require as much foreign exchange as we require now?
Even speak to something I had, Ayo talk about, that the price of, why would the price of Gari go up, for example, if you don't need foreign exchange to import Gari? Of course, when people who are used to consuming something like maybe the semolina or semovita that is imported, when the price of that, goes up because foreign exchange has gone up, you find, some of them, shifting, having no choice but to shift to Gari. So the demand for Gari will now increase because, foreign exchange, because the dollar, has risen. It's now more expensive to import the semolina. So that's called the substitution effect, and it's happened. So when people complain that yes, even though the commodity is produced there locally, is rising because the exchange rate is also rising, there is a connection between the two, and that connection can be explained by the substitution effect. The other issue I want to harp on before I address your question pointedly, has to do with the issue of investing in human capital development, particularly education. In this country, we've done, I can say we have done, quite a lot, and reasonably well, especially with the COVID-19 in the area of health. The government, including the central bank, have invested reasonably, I would say, in the health sector, which is also why we saw, if you look at the GDP report, the health sector, has turned positive in terms of growth. But in the education sector, we need to do a lot more. And given the fact that resources are scarce, it's important that we prioritize the funding of education. We can't, afford to say we are funding everything, all at the same time. By priority, I mean, is it possible for us in this country, as they do in other climes, to identify what I call pillar programs or pillar courses and fund them, okay, and possibly encourage people to go into those programs, either through scholarship or through other incentives. Take agriculture, for example. Agriculture should be a pillar program in this country because of the importance of agriculture. As has been mentioned, it employs over 60% of the population, and as we speak, contributes about 24% to GDP. So if we can take care of agriculture and ensure that we have food security in this country, that will bring down food inflation. And if food inflation comes down, of course it's a whole lot of things becomes easier. One of the ways by which we can do that, as I said, is to say agriculture is a pillar program, and everything along the value chain, including the processing. We have Federal University of Agriculture in this country, Makurdi, Uwaleke, and Abeokuta. We can give them targets, fund them properly, to ensure that each of the universities is known for a particular product that can also be exported, out of this country to earn forex. So that is the attitude I want us to have, with respect to education. Education that is, we reimagine education to be development driven. Why is it that in this country we keep inviting foreigners to come and do our bridges, to come and do our roads, or to do infrastructure in this country? Why can't
on
we,
this particular issue that you have raised of agriculture, engaging the universities of agriculture in the country? The first thing that comes to mind for me anytime issues of education and all are raised is the people that are being taught. On this program, here in this studio, we have engaged a university lecturer like yourself who happens to be in the agriculture space in the university. And we asked her pointedly, how excited are the young people that you are teaching about agriculture? And she was quick to tell us that they are absolutely disinterested. Very, very uninterested. And so if you're talking about us, focusing energy in the area of education, educating people, the young people about agriculture, I would say yes, absolutely yes. But then what is the incentive that we're going to give to these young people to help them to focus, to even be interested in agriculture at the university while they're still in the university, in order to encourage them for the future? Because another 5 years, another 10 years, another 20 years from now, unless we do something now, the problem we're having now is only going to get worse.
Yes, we're on the same page. I think we are saying the same thing. I was talking about incentives by way of maybe scholarship. Okay, you provide scholarship.
My apologies. I'm asking, how do we even get them to be interested in the first place? Many of them are not interested.
No, that's an assumption. I don't think that's true.
But we spoke to a professor, a university lecturer like yourself.
It depends on what you're looking at. The agriculture I'm talking about is not the whole agriculture, mechanized agriculture. Okay, you find people are interested in agric engineering, for example. If you have such programs and and are properly funded, I'm pretty sure you have people showing interest in those programs. And I also want to say this, that the government can also, because of the encumbrances around the conventional university system as we find it, under the regulation of the NUC, the government can focus more on institutes. Okay, institutes. If you look at the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the one that ended in 2020, it has very good initiatives in the area of education. It's just that those initiatives have not been implemented. Okay, it talks about setting up post-university skill acquisition centers across mega ones across the federation, because what the youth require are skills. One estimate says that about 600,000 people, graduates, enter the labor market on an annual basis, and that's even using the number that participates in the National Youth Service program. We have not included those that take exemptions, not included those that come from institutions that are not qualified for youth service. By the time you get all this number, it's running to 1 million. Oh. So every year you have 1 million people entering the labor market. How won't you have a high rate of unemployment? So no matter what you do in terms of job creation, okay, your efforts seem like a drop in an ocean. So we need to change our approach to education by prioritizing, having pillar courses, okay, those ones that people can do, such that we end up conserving foreign exchange. As I said, we don't need to get engineers from China or wherever to do our roads. When we have we can develop the capacity here. It's about priority. If we say engineering is a priority course, we get that fund, get all these things to fund that properly. And the private sector too, can do a lot. The government can engage the private sector, to participate in some of these, funding schemes. I'm happy that the central bank has been intervening, even in education sector. Recently, the central bank was talking about, tertiary institutions, entrepreneurship scheme. Okay, that's laudable.
Another
but
issue
again,
to factor into this whole conversation, you talked about us diverting funds into pillar courses, and I think it's a brilliant idea. I hope someone is listening and can take it on. But one other issue that I think it is a little thorny is that of our debt profile and debt servicing. Now, how significant do you see that how do you see the effect of that on the Nigerian economy? Because if we spend, quite a quite a percentage really, of our budget to service our debts, and it will seem like the debt figures are on the rise all the time, how significantly do you see those debt servicing figures annually affecting our funding and affecting the entire economy, the performance of the Nigerian economy?
Yes, it's actually crowding out funds for development. If we spend as much as, for example, in 2020, we spent 84% of our revenues just servicing debt, and between January and May 2021, the figures I saw, talk about over 90% of our debt of our revenue in servicing debt alone. And I'm sure the government also recognizes that there's a problem, which was why the president, in his address at the 76th United Nations General Assembly yesterday, talked about the debt burden, unsustainability of the debt, public debt for African countries and especially Nigeria. He mentioned that in his speech. So it's actually a problem, even though we say it's a revenue problem. Yes, it's a revenue problem. But because we have not addressed that revenue, okay, the issue of taking more debts, especially when you take it from outside, becomes a lot worrisome. So I think it's something that you can't overemphasize, that there is need to look at other funding sources, other innovative funding sources outside of that. And this can include, for example, what we call securitization. The private sector, as I said, can be involved in the funding of infrastructure. It doesn't have to be government, okay? And securitization means identifying viable projects, getting their flows, inflows, and channeling them to a special purpose vehicle. So through a special purpose vehicle, okay, these things can be sold to members of the public to invest in. So the government should look at other innovative sources of income outside of borrowing. We can't continue to borrow in this country. We have, I think it's becoming unsustainable given the high debt service to revenue ratio.
Thank you very much, Prof. Bob. Just before we go, Mr. Chukwu, quickly, what are your thoughts? I'm sure you've been following the debate about this latest loan that we're asking for. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, what I would say when it comes to loan is that the problem with loan is not necessarily that government is borrowing. The challenge is always that the borrowing is not slightly going into consumption. If we borrow and we invest in infrastructure or in projects that have the capacity to expand the economy, then the economy will grow to the point that we'll pay back those loans. Some of these loans are 30-year loans, which means if the economy is growing, the economy would have grown to the point that we can comfortably pay back the loan. There's actually no challenge with borrowing. The challenge has always been, what are we deploying the funds that we're assessing as credit into? If we invest wisely, if we invest the borrowing proceeds, the proceeds of this borrowing into critical sectors of the economy, then you will be sure that the economy will expand beyond its current level and paying back loans won't be a problem. So I don't have a problem with borrowing. The problem I have is that we have borrowed largely for consumption purposes, which is why the burden of that borrowing in terms of interest payments is actually beginning to impact negatively on us, because we can't see the impact of the borrowing in terms of expansion in the economy or in terms of the capital goods available in the economy, infrastructural supply.
I wanted to ask you, Mr. Chukwu, if you think we should probe the loans over the years, but no, please don't answer that one. For now, I have to thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of this conversation. Professor Uwaleke is former head, Banking and Finance, Nasarawa State University. Thank you very much for your time, as well as Johnson Chukwu, who is MD, Carry Asset Management Limited. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts. So Sunrise continues after now. Do stay with us.